Representative Anderson, you're recognized to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Florida invests a lot of state and federal funding into what I call an alphabet soup of programs. We have SNAP, TCA, SR, E&T, just to name a few. And the goal of all these programs is to help families become economically self-sufficient and produce the best possible outcomes for their children. But sadly, most families in these programs don't actually reach self-sufficiency. We see a lot of folks graduating from receiving TCA and return a few months later. Many even stay on these programs for months, years. Some never get off these programs, which has been enabling a generational cycle of poverty where children do not advance economically. For example, only 1/3 of those participating in the food assistance program, TCA or Medicaid in 2017 had exited the programs for at least 6 months by 2021. More than 40% of families that have participated in the school readiness program have done so for 12 months or more. And just under half of TCA participants who exit the program when they begin earning a higher level of income come back on that same program every single month. There's a lot of reasons why these families have a hard time reaching self-sufficiency, like the lack of childcare, lack of transportation. Some don't even have a GED. So while we have a robust set of benefit programs in the state, many of these programs are not working the way that they're supposed to. And one of the most significant issues is what we call a benefits cliff. And that's where sometimes a very small amount of income can jeopardize an individual from receiving their subsidies. They may lose their entire child care subsidy with just a 50 cents per hour increase. So without that subsidy, a parent can't work, but without the job, the family can't become economically self-sufficient. So members, the bill seeks to maximize the effectiveness of our benefit programs with a focus on fixing these benefit cliffs. It does this in several ways. First, it standardizes the intake and discharge assessments of the various programs and requires DCF to report their findings to the legislature annually. It allows GED classes to count as one of the allowable activities for adults that are receiving TCA. It requires adult SNAP recipients to participate in education and training programs so they can advance their careers. It provides case management services and requires the use of a Cliff Navigator tool when the local workforce boards are working with their families so that they can receive individually tailored information about possible benefit cliffs they may encounter. And then finally, it addresses the benefit cliff for the school readiness program by extending eligibility based on our own state standards in place of the current arbitrary federal standards. And it replaces that cliff with an off-ramp so families can more securely advance their careers. Mr. Speaker, that is the bill.
Are there questions of the sponsor? Representative Williams, any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What's the difference in the federal cliff and the state cliff, the amounts?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative. There's going to be no change to the federal program. That's going to stay exactly the way that it is. This will actually be a separate standalone program that will stand beside our federal program. The current eligibility will remain in place, which is currently 150% of the poverty level.
Representative Williams.
Currently, do we have a waiting list?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, Representative. I'm not sure how long that waiting list is. I'm not able to answer that. I'm sorry.
Representative Williams.
Do we have an estimated amount how many this will take off the waiting list?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative. We don't have that information, but again, we're not changing eligibility, so whoever's on the program now can stay on the program. Wherever they're at in the queue, they'll continue to advance that. What we're doing with the school readiness program is we're extending the period of time that individuals can receive benefits. So we're replacing that cliff where they drop off and replacing it with an off-ramp so individuals can advance their careers, start earning more and more money, and then their benefits will decrease gradually.
Representative Williams.
You stated that some people just have GEDs. Do we have anything in place that will assist them to further their education in this program?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative. That's an important part of this bill. The short answer is yes. So we currently taking GED classes does not count as one of the allowable activities to stay on these programs. We're changing that. So now you can, in fact, advance your career through a GED.
Further questions? Representative Escamani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have one very quick question for you, Rep. Shifting away from the fiscal cliff change, which I believe are positive, I just noticed that we're also codifying what was a change DCF made in the work search requirement from 18 to 53, which is what it was before, to 18 and 59. And I'm curious, just, what's the policy reason to extend that by the 6 years, and how many Floridians are impacted by that?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative, for that question. One thing that's important to clarify there, so that actually does not apply to families that have children. So it's irrelevant for anyone with children, but I think it's important that we support people that are still of working age to further their careers and get off these benefit programs completely.
Members, if you have conversations, please take them to the bubble. We need to have the volume come down a little bit. Representative Escamani, another question? Or Representative Nixon, in questions?
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Can you tell me some of the exemptions? Because I'm along the same line of questioning as Rep. Escamani. Can you talk about some of the exemptions?
Representative Anderson.
Speaker, thank you, Rep. I would say probably the most significant exemption there would be on the SNAP program. So we're exempting families that have children from that work requirement. So I think it's more important that they take care of their kids.
Representative Nixon, in questions.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. So if a person is working and receives SNAP benefits and doesn't have kids, are they still required to go to this training?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The training, there is a work requirement currently. So that's not going to change, but the ages will. Yes, so that age will increase to 59.
Further questions of the sponsor? Representative Gant, in questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rep. Anderson, in lines 250, subsection 7, the new language starting on 249 to 255 regarding the GED requirement. So I just need clarification. I know the point is for people who don't have a GED to get a GED. What if they're working and they can't fulfill the 20 hours? Is there some type of waiver or some type of flexibility with that requirement?
Representative Anderson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Rep. So as long as they're working or pursuing their GED, it would satisfy the work requirement.
Representative Gant, for a follow-up, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the language following that subsection A1, subsection 2 and 3, so those requirements will also be suspended if they're gainfully employed and also working. Is that my understanding? This is my first time seeing the bill, so I just need some clarity on that.
Representative Anderson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rep, can you clarify the lines of the bill that you're referring to? Because there's a couple different exceptions there.
Representative Gant, for a clarification, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lines 256 to 266.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rep, those actually don't pertain at all to an individual working, so that's program-wide. So it's important that we have a certain work requirement to keep our federal funding. So if we drop below that, we need the ability to suspend the GED option.
Representative Gant, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I believe this will probably be my last question. So on page 10, lines 228 to 230, the intake survey, does that already exist and it's just not required and now you're making it a requirement?
Representative Anderson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are a number of different surveys that differ across the various programs. This standardizes. There'll be one survey that will cover all of the programs.
Clarification, Representative Gant, one last bite of the apple. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, so who creates that survey? Is it a federal survey that we'll just adopt, or will a state agency create the survey and it'll be aligned to federal guidelines?
Representative Anderson, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will create that here locally, but it must comply with federal standards. It's very important. These programs are very heavily funded with federal dollars, so we need to stay in compliance with that. And that's specifically why we made the amendment to stand up a separate school readiness program. That way we wouldn't jeopardize violating any of the federal standards.
Representative Williams, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can an individual participate in more than one program?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, ma'am. And in fact, most participants do participate in more than one program.
Follow up. Representative Escamani, you had your microphone up. You're recognized for the last question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think just a clarifying question for members. If for the work reporting requirements, correct me if I'm wrong, if you are working, and I believe it's at least 80 hours a month, you don't have to do any of the additional reporting if you already have a job. Is that correct?
Representative Anderson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If that is the way it is in statute right now, that's not changing in this bill.
Follow up. Anyone have a follow-up question for Representative Anderson on this bill? We're on CS for HB 1267. Seeing no further questions, we'll take a break right now to recognize 3 former members of the Florida House of Representatives. Members, would you welcome back Representative David Richardson, Representative Amy Mercado, and former member, my friend, Debbie Boyd. Members, Representative Boyd is here with an august group from Santa Fe College Foundation, which she's just joined as a board member in the West Gallery. We have about 37 people. Stand up and be recognized with the president of Santa Fe College, Dr. Paul Brody II. Welcome to the Florida House. Are there any amendments?
On the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Read the first amendment.
Representative Anderson offered the following amendment with title amendment. Barcode 036345. Remove lines 387 through 425 and insert an amendment.
Representative Anderson, you have our undivided attention to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment renames the new program the School Readiness Plus program, and it requires the early learning coalitions to minimize the costs so that we can maximize the benefits to families. That is the amendment.
You've heard the amendment. Any members wishing to ask the sponsor a question? We're in sponsor questions. Seeing no questions. Are there any amendments to the amendment?
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Are there any substitute amendments?
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
We're in debate. Members, we're in debate for barcode 036345 on CS for HB 1267. Any debate? Seeing no debate, you're recognized to close on your amendment.
Waive closed, Mr. Speaker.
Having waived closed on his amendment, all those in favor of said amendment say aye. All those opposed, nay. Show the amendment passes. Read the next amendment.
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Show the bill rolled over for a third reading. Read the next bill.